Hey, welcome back, everybody. Good Monday. Great to see you. Got a big time update here for you on what is becoming a record breaking, rapidly intensifying major hurricane Milton in the Gulf of Mexico. And this storm has undergone some of the most impressive rapid intensification we've seen in a long time in the Atlantic basin. For many hurricanes, pressure rapidly dropped nearly 30 millibars in the span of just 3 to 5 hours. Which really is just off the chart stuff. I mean, the hurricane hunters, they're flying in there right now. They found hail in the northwest eyewall of this thing that is really just uncommon in a hurricane. And just, is telling us as meteorologists, we have rapid rising air here in this storm system. And that pressure falling rapidly as some of that air gets vacuumed out of the center of the storm. So really just a very impressive storm system. And unfortunately, this has its eyes set on the Florida Gulf Coast here, the West Coast, specifically from the Big Bend down through the Fort Myers area. Really need to watch this storm, big time, because depending on exact track is going to, play a big role on who sees the worst of these impacts. But either way, we are expecting a major hurricane landfall into the west coast of Florida. So again, unfortunately, we had Helene a couple weeks ago, not catching a break here in the tropics with this one. And again, all eyes are on it. Now, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do so. It's a great way to stay up to date. Every time I post a video with the latest model guidance, you'll be the first to know if you're subscribed, and hit that bell icon next to the subscribe button. Also, like the video and share it. That's a great way for more people to find the video and see it. We kind of get the word out. I think with Helene, we really learned how important it is to spread good information on the internet here with what we're seeing with these storms. So again, that's a great way to do it. And then comment, let me know where you're watching from. I apologize, I have not been responding to comments. I'm unfortunately in the midst of midterm week. So it's been kind of a hectic week, and unfortunately, that's also the reason I haven't had night videos, even though things have been very active. Just how it goes. And, life as a college student, as you can imagine, my schedule is pretty jam-packed. So again, hopefully these morning videos are doing it for you and helping you out. All right, talked enough. Let's go ahead and start talking about the actual weather here. So obviously satellite imagery, the big story is Hurricane Milton. And look at how tiny this storm is. And we're going to zoom in on Milton and really dive into the meteorology behind it. But right now, and just taking a look at the broader view of things, there's Milton, and look at all this precipitation ahead of it too. Another precursor event here in the tropics, just meaning a lot of rain before the storm ever gets there. We are seeing that through the state of Florida. Other than that, we do have Hurricane Kirk up at the top of your screen and Hurricane Leslie at the bottom of your screen. And we're very briefly, and I do mean very briefly, going to touch on those storms. But really, again, Milton is the bigger concern here for the tropics. And you can see that on our map as well. And I'll even show you the 7-day outlook. Let me pull that up for you. Again, 3 hurricanes. Milton, very strong Category 3 storm, getting very close to Category 4. Kirk, a weak Category 1. Leslie, also, or not a weak Category 1, a weak Category 2 storm. So, three hurricanes lined up here into the Atlantic. It's, getting into the middle of October just about. So not something that's very common to see this many hurricanes, especially out into the central Atlantic. It's a little more common in the Gulf and Caribbean, but much less common in the main development region. We do also have a little yellow blob there. That's for a 30% chance of development within the next 7 days. But honestly, we're not really too worried about that one right now, as it doesn't look to really be a problem for much of anybody. All right, Kirk, not a problem. Again, going to move out of here. It is going to move towards Europe, but again, nothing they haven't handled before. 45-mile-an-hour post-tropical cyclone. I think the French Meteorology Service can definitely handle that one. As for Leslie, good news. Leslie is going to kind of die here over the Atlantic, going to get ripped apart by wind shear and some dry air. The area behind it, again, over the Cabo Verde Islands, a 30% chance of development. But we take a look at all the ensembles and put all this together, and you'll notice, yeah, no land is in the path of anything out here into the main development region. So we can basically leave it at that and move on to the more pressing matter, which again is Major Hurricane Milton. All right, so here's our storm. Here's kind of the just Gulf of Mexico in general, and it's hard to see, but there is an eye on this storm. And I'll zoom in here in a second, but here's the storm. Here's the state of Florida. So you'll notice, obviously, we're not that far away here, and the storm is going to pick up speed here eventually as it moves generally towards the Tampa Bay area over the next day or so. We are expecting landfall sometime Wednesday going into Thursday. So It's Monday, late morning into afternoon right now, and that means we're getting close here. Only about 48 hours. Because of that, we do have watches and warnings in effect. But just taking a look at the storm itself, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in even more on this guy, if it will let me. Let's see. Sometimes it's a little finicky. There we go. All right, so let's zoom in on Milton a little bit and take an even more in-depth look at the storm and its structure. And yeah, like I said, it's kind of hard to tell right now, but there is a very pronounced eye on this thing. And generally speaking, with smaller storms, rapid intensification is a much easier process to go through, and that's exactly what we are seeing with Milton. Sorry, it's taking a second to load here, but here's the loop, and again, just look at this thing. I mean, this is the eye. It's so small you almost can't see it, and look at all that lightning around the eye. This is not a storm you would want to be in right now if you're over the Gulf of Mexico. A very small, compact storm with a lot of power, and that's why we're seeing this pressure drop so quickly. With a storm this small, it's a lot easier to kind of go through this rapid intensification. You don't have as much area to cover with that spreading wind field and all these other kind of thermodynamic laws. But either way, again, just know this is very impressive rapid intensification with this pinhole eye, as we call it, just meaning it's super small. But because of that super small size, it is a very strong eye wall. And let's go ahead and take a look at the aircraft recon and kind of get an update here at what they're seeing. They are continuing to fly into the storm, and it looks like we do have a new pass here from the hurricane hunters, which is beautiful timing. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom this in. Flight level winds, they are finding... by the way, to look at this, I'm looking at this graph right here if you kind of want to try to follow along. I know the letters and all might be small, but flight level winds they are seeing in the eye wall near, looks like about 150 knots. So that is near Category 5 status in the flight, in the heights that the plane is flying. So at the surface, probably less than that. We can see if the drop zone has made it all the way down. Pressure's also getting down near 940 millibars. Last time they flew through, it was about, you can see it here, about 947. So, still seeing this very rapid intensification. And folks, I'll be honest with you, there's a chance this storm may try to undergo... not undergo, obviously it is undergoing already, but there is a chance that this storm may get down to near 900 millibars. Sorry, I don't know why it took so long for me to get out, but it has a shot. The storm is expected to continue strengthening through the day today, and then even probably into tomorrow. The storm's got a good 24 to 36 hours left of these prime conditions before, luckily, some more wind shear and dry air will likely affect the storm on final approach, which will help us for sure in the state of Florida, but unfortunately it will not prevent impacts by any means. We are still going to see major hurricane impacts, but luckily it's more likely we see Category 3 hurricane impacts compared to what is likely about to become a Category 5 hurricane just north of the Yucatan Peninsula. So latest track from the National Hurricane Center. And this is new, and just to make sure it's new, I will go ahead and refresh the page here. But they are, again, currently calling for this to get up to 155 mile an hour, basically Category 5 hurricane. That's a mile an hour or 2 miles an hour off from Category 5 status here, sometime overnight tonight. So again, what that tells us is this is expected to continue strengthening all day today, and then finally leveling off sometime tomorrow afternoon before, hopefully, by the time this approaches the state of Florida, weakening back down near a Category 3 hurricane. Now, latest track, the center of the cone basically goes right through the southern Tampa Bay area here through Riverview and basically takes the storm right into the Tampa Bay. So, and then again, up here to the north that you're seeing, this is the city itself. Here are our northern suburbs, St. Petersburg, into Treasure Island, Seminole, Pinellas Park, Largo, Indian Rock Beach, Clearwater. So this would put the northern eye wall, which will likely be the strongest winds, into the city. But luckily, if we get a track like this, that would put the worst of the surge just to the south into the Sarasota area, into the Bradenton area, Bradenton Beach, Longboat Key, and even probably down into the Osprey and Venice area here along the west coast of Florida. But again, the important thing is, look at the cone. This thing could still go anywhere from as far south as Bonita Springs and Naples to as far north as the Cedar Key area. So, there's still a pretty big spread here, but I think the most likely area of landfall right now would be anywhere from we'll say Spring Hill, Florida to the Charlotte Harbor area is probably that most likely range, but it's going to be very important where in that range does it go. Again, does it go just to the north of Tampa? That would bring the worst of the surge into Tampa Bay. Does it go south of Tampa, just north of Port Charlotte? That would bring the worst of the surge into Port Charlotte and Cape Coral and even Fort Myers. A lot to figure out here, but I'll tell you, somebody in the state of Florida is going to get absolutely rocked by this storm, even if it is weakening upon landfall. Because of that, we now have hurricane watches in effect for Fort Myers, Tampa, Cape Coral, up into the Big Bend, with tropical storm watches extending down to the Keys, up into Taylor County, Florida, through the Perry area, even into the coastal areas of the Panhandle there, all the way to Appalachia Bay. Excuse me. Again, got these watches up already. Evacuations are probably about to be issued, if not already, through a lot of these regions. And folks, let me just tell you right now, if they tell you to evacuate, you want to do it. And if you don't believe me, let me go ahead and just go back right here. This is what you're dealing with, okay? You're dealing with a storm to compare it for you, this storm is probably going to get into Hurricane Andrew territory of intensity on approach to Florida. Now, again, hoping that it weakens, but you don't want to hope and you don't want to just wish for it to weaken enough that you're not impacted because, again, a 125-mile-an-hour hurricane is still a major hurricane making landfall. Again, I just cannot stress enough that this is not a storm you want to mess around with. If they tell you to leave, go ahead and leave for your own sake. And if you don't want to do it for yourself, do it for them. Because when you're stranded on the roof of your home because everything under you is ocean, you're putting your life at risk and first responders' life at risk. Again, just listen, okay? I can tell you from firsthand experience, I've got family that originally I'm from Fort Myers. I got plenty of family in Fort Myers that they didn't listen about Ian. Next thing you know, they're swimming in the Gulf of Mexico praying that they make it. Again, just cannot reiterate that point enough. If you're told to leave, go ahead and do it. All right. Now let's go ahead and continue on. I know this video kind of not a great tone, but unfortunately, this is a serious situation. We can have a lighter tone when we're talking about snowstorms, maybe, but this one is going to be heavy. Okay. So state of Florida, and again, we'll dial back in here, but we are seeing what is a bit of a precursor event. We mentioned this a lot with Helene. It's the same story. Basically, what's happening here is we're getting a lot of divergence ahead of the storm and kind of this just general troughing feature. And what this has led to is a lot of areas of kind of enhanced spin crossing the state of Florida, and that is increasing our rising motion and increasing the thunderstorm and storm activity over the Florida Peninsula well ahead of the storm itself. And that's going to continue through the next couple of days. We're going to see a lot of rain, especially south of the I-4 corridor before the storm ever even arrives. Here comes the storm, though, and this is the latest GFS model. We'll get this into Wednesday morning. Notice a 953 millibar low pressure, but what I really want you to focus on less is the millibar and when is it strengthening, when is it weakening. So this is kind of at the bottom of your screen. I know it's hard to see, but the GFS strengthens through today. That makes sense. Strengthens tonight, and then kind of levels off getting into tomorrow and into tomorrow night. But then keeps it there. It doesn't really weaken it much upon landfall. And look at this, even on final approach, gets kind of a final boost of intensity on the GFS model, and then makes landfall here just north of the Tampa Bay area. And again, this picture that you're looking at, this is posted in every emergency management office in Pinellas County and in the Tampa Bay area as worst case scenario. Okay, whenever they plan for what would be the worst case scenario for Tampa, it's this picture right here. It's low pressure, major hurricane moving right over and just north of the bay. And unfortunately, that's exactly what the GFS has shown. And I'll tell you, the GFS has had quite a year in the tropics. It has done very well for many of these storm systems, and this one could be no different. So again, you got to take all your precautions there, and then crosses the I-4 corridor through Florida. And by the way, I'll mention this landfall is overnight Wednesday into Thursday, so probably after the sun goes down Wednesday, and then moves across the I-4 corridor, crosses up near Jacksonville, and then gets back out over the Atlantic, and luckily moves out to sea and gets ripped apart pretty quickly. All right, what about the European? Well, I'm gonna also kind of swing on through the rest of these models, and we'll dive in more in a second, but I just kind of want to give you an overview with most of the models. European, same story. Again, precursor rain event, a lot of rain ahead of the storm. Here comes Major Hurricane Milton. And again, what I want you to notice, and this is important, is a lot of the global models are kind of maintaining intensity here at the last little bit. And that's a trend we need to watch, because how much the storm weakens is going to play a big factor in those impacts. And the GFS, it did weaken it from what peak intensity will be, but unfortunately kind of maintained it up to landfall and even gave it a little bit of a boost there at the last second. But the European, again, track-wise, pressure-wise, it'll probably be deeper than this. I can almost guarantee it'll probably be closer to 950. But track-wise, right over Tampa Bay, maybe just a little bit south. So that would save Tampa Bay itself from the worst of the surge. But what I want you to also notice here is look at the structure of the storm. Notice all of this red and all this heavy convection is on the northern side. We are expecting some dry air and shear to wrap into the south side of the storm, which will prevent that southern eye wall from being very strong. So you're kind of in a troublesome mode either way. You're either on the north side of the storm and you're kind of saved from the storm surge a little bit, but you're getting the worst of the winds, or you're on the south side of the storm and maybe you're not getting as much of the flooding rain, but you're getting a lot more of the storm surge. So either side of the storm is going to see big time impacts, I think, just no matter what are those impacts. Either way, though, crosses the I-4 corridor again, crosses the state of Florida here, right through the heart of the state from Tampa over to the other side on the East Coast there, and then gets back out over into the Atlantic, and again, not really a problem. Now, let's take a look at some hurricane models here. We're going to start with the HWRF model, and just to go ahead and remind you, the hurricane hunters just found pressure near 940 millibars in the eye of the storm, and the latest models say by the time that this video is getting released, there should only be 961 millibars in the center of the storm. So the models are really playing catch up here and are well behind the curve here on how strong the system is. Which could affect the end result, because again, if we're a lot stronger now, it's going to take more to weaken the storm to the point that some of the models weaken it too upon landfall, and that's going to be a pretty important thing here. But either way, you'll notice the trend here is continuing to strengthen through the rest of today. This is after midnight tonight, and I'm not sure what island this is, just north of the Yucatan Peninsula, but it is going to get absolutely rocked tonight by Milton. In fact, that could be one of the hardest hit areas in the Atlantic Ocean this entire hurricane season. So I don't know if many people live on that island. I don't know the story of that island, but not good for that island, I can guarantee you. And the storm continues to strengthen into tomorrow morning, and then leveling off occurs tomorrow evening. So about 24 hours before landfall in Florida, we should begin to see a pause to the weakening, a leveling off, and then probably even weakening itself upon the final we'll say 6 to 12 hours up to landfall. You'll notice that here. Again, still maintaining itself, but on that final approach, that pressure rising, the storm weakening a little bit as that southern eye wall gets likely eroded a bit by some dry air and wind shear. And that's exactly what we will have to hope for here. Latest HWRF, again, like the GFS, though, is still a worst case scenario. Here is Tampa Bay. We have a major hurricane moving parallel just north, or not parallel, perpendicular to the coastline, and moving just north. And this would bring the worst of the storm surge. I mean, this would be probably the worst storm surge the Tampa Bay area has seen in the modern era, with a track like that and with an intensity around 950 millibars. And then moves this just north of the city, brings it inland, and we're seeing a lot of big-time rain impacts through the northern part of the state. And I think this is what radar could look like Thursday morning. You'll notice on the southern side of the state, a lot less rain, but we are seeing strong winds here, especially the closer to the eye you get, obviously. Also, though, a tornado threat here on the south side. We're getting some dry air to wrap in. That's going to increase instability. So from Fort Myers up through Tampa Bay, even back down into the Keys, really even all the way to the west coast from Miami northbound up to the I-4 corridor. I could see a pretty big-time tornado threat with a setup like this here for our Thursday. And also, again, the surge will be worst on the southern side. So Tampa Bay and Port Charlotte both would get surge out of this, just it would be worse in Tampa Bay, but still very notable there into the Port Charlotte and Fort Myers area. And then the storm pulls northward, moves through the Jacksonville area, this northern eye wall, which will still be packing a punch, bringing strong winds through a big swath of northern Florida here. Potentially Ocala, Gainesville, Jacksonville, the I-10 corridor really from Greenville, Florida, all the way to Jacksonville could again get strong winds, much like they did with Hurricane Helene. And you'll even notice some of these outer bands getting up into South Georgia, Tybee Island, maybe up to Savannah. some gusty winds. I don't think hurricane force, but gusty for sure. And then luckily, the storm really dies out over the Atlantic quite quickly and won't be a problem outside of maybe the Carolina coast would be the furthest north this would get, specifically the Georgia and South Carolina coast, not so much North Carolina. All right, final model I will show you here before we kind of take a look at the ingredients. Then we'll zoom into Florida more in depth with the GFS and take a look at wind impacts and all that stuff. But here we go. So latest, what are we looking at? The HAFS A model. Similar story. Again, this island north of the Yucatan tonight, just going to get absolutely rocked. Honestly, hell on earth conditions there. So not what you want to see. Hopefully people don't live there. And if they do, hopefully they got out. I think there was enough warning that they should have. But here comes the storm, continuing to strengthen, and take a look at this. This model gets this thing down to 910 millibars at max strength here sometime overnight Tuesday into Wednesday. This, I'll be honest, I don't think this is out of the question. I think it is possible. I'm not going to say likely, but it's a good 40% chance, I'd say, that this gets below 900 millibars, which I think would be the first Atlantic storm to do it since was it Wilma, I think, back in 2005 that got to 800 and something millibars. So we could see some records broken with Milton here, folks. This is big time rapid intensification that we're seeing. Maybe at the end of the video, if I can remember, we'll go back again and look to see if the hurricane hunters have done another pass through the eye. But again, just unfortunate. The good news, though, this model as well weakens upon approach, although again, very similar to the other models, right into or just north of the Tampa Bay area as a strong major hurricane. And again, the structure is very similar. The worst of the wind here on the north side with this northern eye wall, the surge, the worst here right into Tampa Bay, potentially 12 feet of storm surge, which just for perspective, Helene, which just brought big time storm surge to this area, was about 6 to 8 feet of storm surge. So add another 4 to 5 feet on top of that. That just goes to show you, if you thought you should have evacuated for Helene, wait until Milton. You'll really be regretting not evacuating if you don't. Again, if you're in one of those storm surge prone areas. Another thing to note here, all these feeder bands here upon approach and also landfall time. This is 8 p.m. Wednesday, so right after the sun sets, all this tornadic activity through the southern end of the state. But again, that dry air filtering into the storm, we're going to see a lot less rain to the south and a lot less wind, I think, as well. But still storm surge from Tampa Bay through Sarasota, even down into Port Charlotte. Fort Myers is going to get storm surge. Just probably not quite as bad as the Tampa Bay area with the current track. But again, this could wobble south. This could wobble north. We will watch and keep you updated on those wobbles. But crosses the I-4 corridor, similar story here, a little bit further south on its kind of march across the state, but still the worst of the weather inland probably going to be through the Gainesville, Ocala, Jacksonville area with potentially hurricane force winds. And then luckily, again, back out into the Atlantic and kind of dies out pretty quickly as a whole bunch of wind shear and dry air take over. All right, speaking of wind shear and dry air, this is why we are expecting some weakening. But again, I will remind you, some of the global models like the GFS I showed you, which has done very well with strength this year, kind of maybe not weakening the storm as much as we would hope. And this is why I think. Again, and now through tomorrow, prime conditions for a continued intensification here. I mean, you'll see why. Let me back this up a little bit. The worst of the wind shear is still well to the north of the storm. We're still seeing plenty of kind of divergence along the storm itself. That is fanning out this convection. So we're going to see plenty of intensification through the next 24 to 36 hours. It's upon that final approach, though, that this is when things could become a little bit more detrimental for the storm. And also, this is going to expand the storm. And here's why. Wednesday afternoon, look at this very big kind of jet streak to the north over Carolina and the Virginias. This is going to pull a lot of air out of the northern side of the storm, and that's going to expand the wind field probably pretty significantly here upon that final approach to the north. Now, to the south, we're not seeing a lot of divergence, and we're also probably going to see some dry air, which I'll show you in just a second here. Also, you'll note we've got some kind of westerly shear here that is going to try to go over the storm system, but you'll notice kind of what happens is this westerly shear moves towards the storm and then moves up into this jet streak. So depending on the exact orientation will depend on how much this weakens the storm. If it does like this, and again, this is why the GFS isn't weakening the storm quite as much as we're not getting that exact parallel motion over the storm. This is still almost kind of fanning it out a bit. But if we get something a little bit more like this and then up and over the storm, that'll help us a good bit more to kind of shear it apart. And with that shearing, on the backside of this storm, we are going to see pretty big time dry air. Right now, the storm is cocooned in a pocket of very moist air, but you'll notice upon final approach that wind shear is trying as hard as it can to wrap this dry air into the center of circulation, and we will absolutely have to hope that can occur. It's a little late though, and it's going to be close. Again, notice the GFS actually kind of strengthens a little bit here upon final approach because it just doesn't really get that dry air all the way into the storm, and the orientation of that wind shear or those upper level winds is actually not quite as harmful to the storm as maybe it looked a couple runs prior. But as the storm moves inland, I do expect that dry air to really wrap in. And by the time it gets into the Atlantic, I mean, this thing's just going to get ripped apart by that wind shear and dry air. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about impacts, and let me show you potential tracks one more time. These are the GFS ensembles. Just to show you, again, we have a cluster here just north of Tampa Bay. We also have a cluster over and just south of Tampa Bay. So which one of these tracks it takes will be very important, I think. Again, if it takes this southern cluster, the worst of the surge will be into Fort Myers, into Port Charlotte, Cape Coral. If it takes this northern track, then the worst of the surge will be right into the Tampa Bay area. And again, either one of those tracks are still very possible. I think, though, the trend has been a little bit more towards this northern cluster of ensemble members. But again, you folks in Fort Myers are still going to see surge no matter what. It's just a matter of how far south does it get will tell us exactly how strong that surge will be. And how strong will the surge be? Well, the latest forecast from the National Hurricane Center, 8 to 12 feet of storm surge expected into Tampa Bay, 5 to 10 feet into Charlotte Harbor, into the Fort Myers area, all the way down to Bonita Beach. But even south of there into extreme southwest Florida, portions here could still get 2 to 7 feet of storm surge, depending on where you're at, 1 to 3 feet into the Keys, and potentially even some surge up north, maybe a couple feet, but nothing compared to what we saw with Helene through the Suwannee River area and into Steinhatchee. This is not going to be as bad as Helene in the storm surge department. But again, 8 to 12 feet of storm surge in Tampa Bay really could be devastating for some communities. And like I said, Helene, I think they got 6 to 8 feet. Spots might have hit 9. Add another 4 or 5 feet on top of that. That's what this storm is likely to bring. So if you thought Helene was bad, just wait till you see what Milton does. All right, rainfall also going to be a threat here. Again, kind of seeing precursor rain to the south here, but the worst of the rain from the storm itself will be right here through this northern stretch from Jacksonville through Orlando, Ocala, Gainesville, back into the Big Bend, Steinhatchee, the northern suburbs of Tampa Bay, likely to get the worst of the rain out of this, and also probably the worst of the wind. But spots could get a foot of rainfall, so flooding will be a concern for sure in a lot of these kind of northern communities. Also a tornado threat, like I mentioned. This is Wednesday, a slight risk, tornado-driven slight risk, I can almost guarantee you here, south of the I-4 corridor. So that'll be where the worst of the tornado threat will be, from the Keys all the way up to the I-4 corridor, going to have the highest tornado threat with this system on Wednesday. And then Thursday, that threat will probably pull north a little bit here, more over the I-4 corridor, and potentially kind of between I-10 and I-4 into that region of the state of Florida. All right, let me time this out for you one more time, just so we are all on the same page. Let me back up this. Again, a whole bunch of prefrontal rain here. We're going to move through the state of Florida over today and tomorrow. That's not the storm. Here comes the storm. This is Milton. Things go downhill Wednesday afternoon. That storm surge is going to increase as the storm moves kind of up the coast a little bit through the Fort Myers area, through Port Charlotte, into Tampa Bay, going to see that storm surge increase. And then landfall expected Wednesday evening and overnight as a strong major hurricane. This will be the worst of it for Tampa Bay. And then we go into the overnight hours. The worst of it will move into North Florida with this northern eyewall gusting up to hurricane force at times. We're going to see a lot of down trees. I can tell you from when I storm chased Helene, a whole bunch of North Florida pine trees are going to get taken down with this one once again. Here along I-75, there's going to be a stretch of I-75 you do not want to cross Wednesday night, kind of between I-10 and I-4 as this moves through. Very heavy rainfall, flooding threat, wind threat. Tornado threat to the south overnight Thursday. And then luckily, this gets back out over the ocean by Thursday morning and afternoon. But at this point, we can see some storm surge into coastal South Carolina and Georgia from Charleston southbound. Some heavy rain, some gusty winds through those regions, and again, some increased storm surge as we get this kind of onshore flow around the storm system. Luckily, though, by overnight Thursday and by Friday, the storm is well out of here and we can begin the cleanup process through much of the southeast. All right, wind gust wise here, just to give you this idea, this is the GFS, and the GFS again has done very well this year with winds. So let's time this out. This is 2 p.m. Wednesday. From this point on, things go downhill. Tropical storm force wind gusts begin along the beaches of West Florida, from Tampa down through, we'll say, Naples, that area. But here comes the storm. It moves inland. This is 8 p.m. This will be the worst of the wind, clocking in wind gusts into the 80 to 100 mile an hour range from Tampa to Sarasota, through really the entire Tampa Bay area. And then this moves inland. Look at this. Winds gusting up past 100 miles an hour through Tampa. This is 11 p.m. Wednesday, gusting up 50, 60, 70 miles an hour inland. Here, again, we're going to have a lot of down trees along I-75 from Gainesville all the way down through Tampa. It's really going to be a nightmare to drive through here overnight Wednesday, with winds gusting well past hurricane strength, sustained winds probably past hurricane strength. And then even overnight and into the early morning hours, winds gusting up near 60, 70 miles an hour into North Florida from Gainesville, Ocala, up through the Jacksonville area, seeing some gusty winds through the morning hours of Thursday. Again, going to bring some trees down, probably cause some power outages, and stays gusty through the day Thursday, but then clears out by Thursday evening. And by the time we're waking up on Friday, all clear through the sunshine state. All right, southeast as a whole here, we took a look at Florida. South Georgia, we could get some gusty winds, maybe gusting near tropical storm strength through extreme southeastern Georgia here overnight Wednesday into the early morning hours of Thursday. Maybe even up the Carolina coastline through the Charleston area. You could see gusty winds down through Beaufort, again into Tybee Island. Probably similar to what some of those coastal regions saw with Helene, where it wasn't so bad. This one will probably, again, be gust maybe 40 to 50 miles an hour. So nothing we haven't seen before, but still enough that it's worth noting for sure here. And again, that will increase storm surge for those regions. And again, stay gusty through the afternoon Thursday, but then clear out by Friday. All right, that is Milton, and this video is going way longer than I would like, but let's go ahead and very briefly talk about what's going on elsewhere in the country. A current satellite loop, here's our cold front, again, starting to work on through. We're seeing those dew points drop this afternoon. For many of us, it is starting to feel like fall, but again, some of us still dealing with some muggy weather. Radar-wise, really, the only rain we're seeing outside of what we talked about into Florida is here into the northeast as that front is moving on through. A pretty rainy commute here from Boston down through Providence, Hartford, up into Augusta, Bangor, Maine, Concord, New Hampshire. Again, seeing some pretty good fall-like chilly rain working on through into that region. Again, the state of Florida, like I said, a whole lot of prefrontal, or not even prefrontal, precursor rain, if you want to call it that, before Milton ever even arrives. So a lot of rain in that region. Out into the plains, out to the Midwest, out west, not a lot going, a couple of showers in places, but nothing really too concerning out that way. All right, let's time out the next 48 hours or so. Again, up into the northeast, there's that rain working on through today. The state of Florida, a whole lot of rain today as well. Overnight tonight into tomorrow, that cold air works on through, and we could see some lake effect precipitation from New York into Pennsylvania, maybe even northern Michigan, and into the UP here for our Tuesday. Again, a lot of that cold air rushing over these warm bodies of water. Look at that precipitation picking up with it. Also some rain up into New Brunswick and Nova Scotia for our Tuesday afternoon. And then again, just some lake effect showers. Could be convective showers in nature here for our Tuesday afternoon through the northeast. But other than that, and other than what's happening into Florida, pretty quiet, nice, calm conditions. And you can see that with our dew point map here. Again, still pretty muggy for a lot of us in the deep south today and into the Carolinas. So you're probably wondering, well, where's that fall air? Well, here it comes. We'll move this ahead into time. Sorry, let me get the map to function here. Well, let's see. Will the map function here? We'll do it this way. So again, this afternoon, that cold air oozes over the Appalachia chain, and by the time we're waking up Tuesday morning, dew points in beautiful order through much of the east here, east of the Rockies. Some straggling muggy air through the South Carolina coast and down into South Georgia, and definitely through the state of Florida. It's going to stay muggy. But again, just look at these nice dew points funneling in, and that continues through the week ahead. So let me move this ahead again. This very nice air, some humidity and higher dew points going to get shoved back into South Carolina, specifically coastal South Carolina, again, and southwestern Georgia here, or excuse me, southeastern Georgia here as as Hurricane Milton kind of moves on through. Sorry. But other than that, again, stays dry, stays nice, and there's even signs a stronger cold front could try to work on through about a week or so from now. I mean, look at these dew points. These are big time. I mean, these are wintertime dew points for the middle of October. And we'll monitor that, and I'll keep you up to date. But still nothing set in stone there. And again, we got plenty of time to watch it. So the theme this week, obviously, Hurricane Milton is the big story. Elsewhere through the east here, east of the Rockies, chilly mornings, warm afternoons. So kind of sweater mornings, t-shirt afternoon, kind of typical fall weather here for most of us. But again, getting closer to wintertime, it's going to, before you know it, going to be jacket morning, jacket afternoon. And we could even see that again a week from now with that next big cold front, depending on the strength and the track that takes. Alrighty, folks, that's what I got for you here on this Monday. Again, hopefully you enjoyed it. Consider sharing it with somebody, like the video, and subscribe if you haven't already. With that said, have a wonderful rest of your Monday, and I'll see you all tomorrow.